24 hours ago, I was Grace Sullivan. Nobody special, just another poor girl scraping by in a city that chews up dreamers and spits them out. Tonight, I'm sitting in this police station, steel handcuffs cutting into my wrists, staring at tomorrow's newspaper headline, "Poor Girl Cons Billionaire, or Did She?" The fluorescent lights buzz overhead like angry wasps. Detective Martinez slides a manila folder across the scarred metal table. Inside, photos of me and James Mitchell, the tech mogul worth more than some small countries. Me in my thrift store dress, him in his $1,000 suit. The pictures tell a story, all right, just not the true one. Drug dealing, fraud, extortion. Martinez reads off charges like items on a grocery list. That's 15 to 20 years, Miss Sullivan. I want to laugh or cry, maybe both. Because the real story, the one about murder, family secrets, and a love that survived hell itself, nobody saw that coming. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 24 hours earlier, my world was small but mine. The studio apartment on Maple Street wasn't much. Peeling wallpaper, a radiator that clanked like Jacob Marley's chains, and a kitchenette so tiny you had to step into the hallway to change your mind. But it was home. Grandma's patchwork quilt covered the second-hand sofa, her worn Bible sat on the milk crate I used as a nightstand, and her voice still echoed in every corner, "Gracie, honey, being poor ain't a sin, but being cruel sure is." On the kitchen table, medical textbooks competed for space with overdue bills. The nursing school rejection letter lay folded beside them. Insufficient funds for tuition assistance. I'd read it so many times the creases were wearing thin. Mama and Daddy's photo in their firefighter uniforms watched over it all, their smiles frozen in time before the factory fire took them when I was 16. My hands bore the evidence of my double life. Rough from scrubbing hospital floors during the day, cramped from gripping a steering wheel through endless night shifts driving strangers around the city. The ride-share app on my cracked phone showed my rating, 4.98 stars. People trusted me with their drunken confessions, their midnight emergencies, their secret destinations. I was invisible until they needed me, and that suited me just fine. Across town, in a glass tower that scraped the belly of heaven, James Robert Mitchell stood at floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a city he owned but never truly saw. His penthouse was a monument to success, imported marble, designer furniture that no one sat on, wine that cost more than most people made in a month. The silence was deafening. Sarah's picture dominated the mantel, her brilliant smile mocking the emptiness around it. 3 years since the accident, and he still set 2 places for dinner, still bought her favorite flowers every Friday, still woke up reaching for someone who'd never reach back. The tech empire everyone credited to his genius. Sarah had built it from nothing while he played the charming frontman. Now he was living a lie wrapped in expensive suits. His phone buzzed with the same nightly ritual. A call from his mother, Eleanor Victoria Mitchell, old Charleston money with a voice like silk over steel. "James, darling, you simply must stop this wallowing. It's beneath the Mitchell name." But tonight felt different. Tomorrow marked 3 years since Sarah's death, and the memorial gala would be full of people offering the same hollow condolences. He poured another drink, watching the amber liquid catch the city lights. Outside, Grace Sullivan was counting quarters for gas money, unaware that fate was about to collide their worlds in ways neither could imagine. Neither knew that Eleanor Mitchell sat in her Bentley outside Grace's building, watching, waiting, planning. Some storms you see coming, others strike without warning. The rain started as a whisper against my windshield, then built to a symphony that drowned out the city's late-night chorus. 11:47 p.m., and my phone buzzed with one last ride request. The Grandview Hotel. the kind of place where doormen wore white gloves and probably earned more in tips than I made in a week. I should have gone home, should have called it a night and counted my meager earnings, but rent was due in 3 days, and Mrs. Chen at the corner market had been kind enough to let me buy groceries on credit again. The hotel's golden entrance blazed against the storm like something out of a fairy tale. Valets in pristine uniforms shepherded luxury cars under the covered portico, while guests in evening wear darted between raindrops, their laughter echoing off marble columns. I pulled my battered Honda to the curb, feeling like a rust stain on silk. Inside the lobby, a memorial gala was winding down. Black ties and designer gowns, champagne flutes catching crystal chandelier light, the soft murmur of people who'd never known what it meant to choose between dinner and electricity. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I spotted my passenger. James Mitchell stood apart from the crowd, shoulders rigid beneath his tailored tuxedo. Even from a distance, I could see the exhaustion carved into his features like worry lines in marble. His bow tie hung loose around his neck, and he clutched a tumbler of something amber that caught the light like liquid gold. He wasn't looking at the party. He was staring through it as if watching ghosts dance among the living. "Mr. Mitchell?" I called through my cracked window, raising my voice over the rain's percussion. He turned, and for a moment I saw something raw and unguarded flash across his face. Pain, maybe, or recognition of a kindred spirit floating in the same dark waters. Without a word, he walked to my car, moving like a man underwater, and slid into the back seat. "I just want to go home," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I glanced at the address already loaded on my app. Some mansion in the hills where the air was thinner and the views came with price tags that had too many zeros. "Of course, sir." The first few miles passed in silence. City lights streaked past like fallen stars, and the rain turned everything beyond the windows into an impressionist painting. Then, somewhere between the business district and the residential hills, he spoke. "Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" I met his eyes in the rearview mirror. They were the color of storm clouds, and just as turbulent. "Every day," I admitted. "But sometimes we have to walk in borrowed shoes until we find our own path." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Borrowed shoes?" That's exactly right." He leaned his head against the window, breath fogging the glass. 3 years ago today, my wife died in a car accident. Everyone thinks I built this empire we had together, but the truth is, Sarah was the genius. I was just the face she hid behind. I kept my eyes on the winding road ahead, but my heart clenched. Grief's got a way of making us question everything we thought we knew about ourselves. "She was going to leave me," he continued, as if I hadn't spoken. "Found out I wasn't the man she married. Wasn't the man anyone thought I was." The words hung in the air like incense, heavy and sacred. I'd heard confessions before, drunk businessmen admitting affairs, college kids crying about parents they disappointed, elderly folks mourning friends who'd passed. But this felt different. This felt like absolution. "Maybe she saw something in you that you're still learning to see in yourself," I offered. By the time we reached his gates, he'd gone quiet again. The mansion beyond looked like something from a magazine, all glass and stone and architectural impossibility. But when I turned around to tell him we'd arrived, I found him fast asleep, his head tilted against the seat, one hand still clutching his phone. For a moment, I just watched him breathe. Without the weight of consciousness pulling at his features, he looked younger, more peaceful. Vulnerable in a way that made my chest tight with an emotion I couldn't name. I should have woken him, should have collected my fare and moved on to the next passenger, the next small transaction in the gig economy that kept me afloat. Instead, I reached into the back seat for Grandma's old quilt, the one I kept for emergencies, for nights when the heater died or the car broke down far from home. Gently, I draped it over his shoulders. Then I stepped out into the rain. The intercom crackled when I pressed the button. Yes? I brought Mr. Mitchell home. He's asleep in the car. Could someone help him inside? Within minutes, a man in a dark suit appeared with an umbrella, moving with the quiet efficiency of someone accustomed to handling delicate situations. Together we helped James from the car, his movements sluggish but cooperative. "Thank you," the man said. His assistant, I assumed. "This is very kind." I was back in my car, key in the ignition, when James stirred long enough to look at me through the rain-streaked window. Our eyes met for just a moment, and I saw something there. Surprise, maybe, or gratitude. Then his assistant guided him toward the house, and I drove away into the night. I never asked for his story, never pushed for details about his empire or his wealth. To me, he was just a man who needed a safe ride home, and sometimes that's enough. But as I navigated the empty streets back to my neighborhood, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in the universe. Some invisible thread had been pulled taut between two strangers who'd found, in each other's presence, a moment of genuine human connection. What I didn't know was that Eleanor Mitchell had been watching from her Bentley, hidden in the shadows beyond the gates. She'd photographed everything: my kindness, my care, the way her son had looked at me like I mattered, and in her mind, I'd just become a threat that needed to be eliminated. The morning sun filtered through my apartment's thin curtains, casting everything in the pale gold of new beginnings. I'd managed 3 hours of sleep before my day job called. Cleaning crew at St. Mary's Hospital started at 6 a.m. sharp. My body ached from the night shift, but the familiar weight of exhaustion was something I'd learned to carry like an old friend. I was reaching for my coffee when I heard the knock. Not the sharp rap of bill collectors or the hesitant tap of neighbors asking for favors, but something softer, more uncertain. Through the peephole, I saw him, James Mitchell, looking remarkably put together for a man who'd passed out drunk in my back seat 12 hours earlier. "Mr. Mitchell?" I opened the door just wide enough to see him clearly, suddenly aware of my wrinkled scrubs and the fact that I probably smelled like industrial disinfectant. He held up my grandmother's quilt, freshly dry-cleaned and folded with military precision. "I believe this is yours. You didn't have to." "Actually, I did." His smile was different in daylight, less haunted, more genuine. "May I come in? Just for a moment?" Against my better judgment, I stepped aside. He took in my small world with the careful attention of someone who understood that every detail mattered. The medical textbooks stacked beside unpaid bills, the photo of my parents in their firefighter gear, the rejection letter from nursing school I'd been too proud to throw away. "You're studying to be a nurse," he observed, not a question but a statement of respect. "Trying to. Turns out good intentions don't pay tuition." I gestured toward the letter, embarrassment heating my cheeks. "Coffee?" "Please." He settled onto my grandmother's quilt-covered sofa, looking oddly at home among the thrift store furniture and hand-me-down hope. "I did some research after I got home." Grace Sullivan, 2 jobs, 4.98 rating on 3 different rideshare apps, spotless record, references from supervisors who use words like extraordinary and irreplaceable. I nearly dropped the coffee pot. "You had me investigated?" "I had you appreciated," he corrected gently. "There's a difference. Last night, you could have woken me up, collected your fare, and moved on. Instead, you covered me with your grandmother's quilt and made sure I got inside safely. When's the last time someone did something kind for you without expecting anything in return?" The question hit harder than I expected. I poured coffee into 2 mismatched mugs, buying time to think. "That's just what people do for each other." "No," he said quietly. "It isn't. Not in my world." I handed him the coffee, black, because I was out of cream and sugar seemed like a luxury I couldn't afford. He took it without complaint, sipping the bitter brew like it was the finest vintage. "I want to help you get through nursing school," he said. The words hung between us like a bridge I was afraid to cross. "Mr. Mitchell." "James, please." "James, I can't take your money. I won't be anyone's charity case." His laugh was warm, free from the bitter edge I'd heard the night before. "Charity? Grace? I've met plenty of people who'd take whatever I offered without question. You're turning down what could change your entire life because of pride. That's not someone who needs charity. That's someone worth investing in." I sat across from him on the only chair I owned, a wobbly thing I'd rescued from a curb 3 years ago. "Why me? You don't know anything about me. I know you work 2 jobs to chase a dream that matters more to you than comfort. I know you treat drunk strangers with more kindness than most people show their families. I know you understand loss. I can see it in your eyes, the same weight I carry." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Sarah used to say that God puts people in our path when we need them most. Maybe you saved me last night, and maybe this is how I can return the favor." The mention of his wife made my chest tight. "I read about her in the newspapers. I'm sorry for your loss." 3 years tomorrow," he said, the words carrying the weight of accumulated grief. "Everyone thinks I built sterling solutions from nothing, but the truth is Sarah was the visionary. I was just good at explaining her ideas to investors who wouldn't take a brilliant woman seriously." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I've been living her legacy ever since, trying to be worthy of what she left behind." "Maybe that's what she wanted," I said softly. "Maybe she saw something in you that you're still learning to see in yourself." He stared at me for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. "You said something similar last night. About walking in borrowed shoes until we find our own path. My grandmother used to say that. She raised me after my parents died." I gestured toward their photo. "House fire when I was 16. They were volunteer firefighters. Went in to save a family trapped on the 3rd floor. Got everyone out, but the ceiling collapsed before they could escape." "Heroes," he said simply. "Heroes don't pay for college," I replied, then immediately regretted the bitterness in my voice. "I'm sorry, I don't usually—" "Don't apologize for being human, Grace. How much do you need for tuition?" The question caught me off guard. "I can't—" "Humor me. How much?" $43,000 for the 2-year program." The number felt enormous, spoken aloud, a mountain I'd been trying to climb with nothing but determination and dented hopes. He didn't even blink. "Done." "James?" "Not a gift. A loan. 0 interest. Payments start after you graduate and find a job. We'll draw up proper paperwork, make it official." He stood, moving to my small window that overlooked the street where children played hopscotch on cracked sidewalks. "I've been looking for something real to invest in, something that matters. You matter, Grace." I wanted to say yes. God help me. I wanted to grab that lifeline with both hands and let it pull me out of the quicksand of poverty I'd been sinking in since I was 16. But accepting felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross, stepping into a world where I owed something I might never be able to repay. "I need to think about it," I said finally. He nodded, understanding written in the lines around his eyes. "Of course. But Grace, don't let pride steal your future. Sometimes accepting help isn't weakness, it's wisdom." After he left, I sat in my tiny apartment staring at the nursing school letter, at my parents' smiling faces, at the life I'd built from the ashes of loss and disappointment. For the first time in years, the future felt like something I could actually reach, instead of just dream about. What I didn't know was that Eleanor Mitchell was having me followed. that every moment of kindness between her son and me was being catalogued, photographed, analyzed for weaknesses. In her mind, I was already the enemy, a threat to everything she'd spent decades building. The war for James Mitchell's soul was about to begin, and I didn't even know I was enlisted. 2 weeks after James's offer, my world shifted on its axis in ways I never could have anticipated. I'd finally called him, accepting the loan with conditions that preserved what remained of my dignity: official paperwork, regular payments, no special treatment. What I hadn't expected was how quickly the media sharks would smell blood in the water. The first photograph appeared on a gossip blog, James and me leaving the coffee shop where we'd signed the loan documents. The caption read, "Tech Billionaire's Mystery Woman, Gold Digger, or True Love." Within hours, it had spread across social media like wildfire. My phone buzzed incessantly with calls from reporters, friend requests from strangers, and messages ranging from supportive to downright vicious. "You don't understand what this means," my supervisor at the hospital, Mrs. Rodriguez, said when I arrived for my shift the next morning. She pulled me aside, her weathered face creased with concern. "These people, they'll dig into everything. Your background, your finances, your family history. Are you prepared for that?" I wasn't prepared for any of it. Not for the photographer who followed me home from work. Not for the reporter who somehow got my phone number and called at 3 in the morning. And certainly not for the anonymous letters that started appearing in my mailbox. Some calling me a hero for catching a good one, others labeling me a manipulative opportunist. "Grace, we need to talk," James said when he called that evening. His voice carried a weight I hadn't heard before, heavy with something that might have been regret. We met at his office building after hours, the lobby empty, except for a lone security guard who nodded respectfully as James led me to the elevators. His office on the 40th floor was a monument to success. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, awards and accolades covering one wall, a conference table that could seat 20 people but somehow made the room feel lonelier rather than grander. "I'm sorry," he said before I could even sit down. "I should have anticipated this, should have protected you better." I settled into one of the leather chairs across from his desk, struck by how small he looked despite the grandeur surrounding him. "You couldn't have known." Actually, I could have. Should have. He moved to the windows, hands clasped behind his back as he stared out at the glittering lights below. "This is what happens when you're in the public eye. Every connection becomes a story. Every kindness gets twisted into something it's not. James, I can handle a few gossipy articles. It's not just articles." He turned back to me, his expression grave. "My mother called an emergency board meeting today. She's concerned about the company's image, about potential scandals affecting stock prices. She wants me to distance myself from you." The words hit like a physical blow. I'd never met Eleanor Mitchell, but her presence had loomed over every conversation James and I had shared. The proud Southern matriarch who'd raised him after his biological parents died in a plane crash when he was 12, who'd guided Sterling Solutions through its early years, who commanded respect and fear in equal measure throughout Charleston's social elite. "Maybe she's right," I said quietly. "Maybe this was a mistake." "Don't." The sharpness in his voice surprised us both. "Don't let their poison convince you that kindness was a mistake." But the damage was spreading faster than we could contain it. The next morning, a tabloid published a full exposé titled, "From Rags to Riches, the Cinderella Story That's Too Good to Be True." They'd somehow obtained my financial records, my employment history, even quotes from former classmates I barely remembered. The narrative they crafted painted me as a calculating opportunist who'd targeted James specifically, a modern-day grifter using his grief as a weapon. The response at the hospital was swift and brutal. Patients who'd known me for months suddenly avoided eye contact. Co-workers whispered when I passed. Mrs. Rodriguez called me into her office with tears in her eyes. Grace, I'm sorry. I truly am. But we've received complaints about your conduct, concerns about whether you're here for the right reasons. The administration feels it would be best if you took a leave of absence until this situation resolves itself. Complaints about what conduct? I've never done anything. I know, Mija. I know. But perception is reality in this business. We can't have patients questioning their nurses' motivations. I cleaned out my locker in silence, my colleagues' eyes following me like I was a criminal being perp-walked through their sterile world. 3 years of building trust, of proving myself, of earning respect through honest work, all of it destroyed by a single photograph and the assumptions that followed. The rideshare app suspended my account that afternoon. Multiple reports of unprofessional behavior, the automated message explained. No details, no opportunity to defend myself, just the digital equivalent of a death sentence to someone whose survival depended on the gig economy. James found me sitting on the steps outside my apartment building that evening, staring at the eviction notice I'd found taped to my door. Without my 2 jobs, I'd missed rent by 4 days. In the world of poverty, there were no grace periods, no second chances, no understanding that sometimes circumstances beyond your control could destroy everything you'd worked to build. "This is my fault," he said, settling beside me on the concrete steps. "All of it." "No," I replied, folding the notice carefully and sliding it into my purse. "This is what happens when 2 worlds collide. Sometimes the impact destroys everything. Come stay at my place. Just temporarily, until we figure this out." The suggestion hung between us like a loaded weapon. "James, if I move in with you now, it'll confirm everything they're saying about me." "I don't care what they say." "You should. Because it's not just about us anymore. It's about your company, your employees, your mother's legacy, your wife's legacy." I stood, brushing dust from my jeans. "Maybe your mother's right. Maybe some bridges aren't meant to be crossed." He grabbed my hand as I turned to go inside. "Sarah used to say that the only way to fail was to stop trying. Don't let them win, Grace. Don't let their cruelty convince you that what we have isn't worth fighting for." But as I climbed the stairs to my empty apartment, I wondered if what we had was love or just 2 lonely people clinging to each other in the dark. And more importantly, I wondered if the difference mattered when the cost of finding out might destroy us both. What I didn't know was that Eleanor Mitchell was orchestrating every attack, every revelation, every humiliation. She'd hired private investigators, paid off reporters, and pulled strings I didn't even know existed. In her mind, she was protecting her son from a predator. The war had begun, and I was losing battles I didn't even know I was fighting. The package arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier in an expensive suit who waited while I signed for it with trembling hands. Inside the manila envelope were photographs, dozens of them, taken with telephoto lenses from angles that made my skin crawl. Me leaving the hospital, me pumping gas, me talking to James outside the coffee shop, our conversation frozen in black and white like evidence of some terrible crime. At the bottom of the stack was a single sheet of cream-colored stationery, the kind that cost more per page than I spent on groceries in a week. The letterhead read, "Eleanor Victoria Mitchell," in elegant script that somehow managed to look both beautiful and menacing. "Miss Sullivan," it began in handwriting that belonged in a museum. "I believe it's time we had a conversation about my son's future. Please meet me at the Charleston Club tomorrow at 3 o'clock. "Come alone." My hands shook as I read the words twice, 3 times, trying to decode the threat hidden beneath the polite veneer. Eleanor Mitchell, the woman whose very name made society pages and corporate boardrooms pay attention, who'd built an empire from old Southern money and New World ruthlessness. James spoke of her with a mixture of love and fear that I'd never fully understood until now. The Charleston Club occupied a building that predated the Civil War, its columns and porticos speaking of a time when bloodlines mattered more than bank accounts. I arrived 15 minutes early, wearing the only dress I owned that wasn't secondhand, a simple black sheath I'd bought for my parents' funeral and hadn't worn since. Eleanor Mitchell sat at a corner table like a queen holding court, her silver hair arranged in a perfect chignon, her pearls catching the afternoon light that filtered through ancient windows. She was smaller than I'd expected, more delicate, but there was steel in her spine and winter in her eyes. "Miss Sullivan." She didn't rise to greet me, didn't offer her hand. "Please, sit." I settled into the chair across from her, hyper-aware of every sound, the clink of china, the murmur of other conversations, the tick of an antique clock that seemed to count down to my execution. "You're younger than I expected," she said, studying me with the clinical detachment of a scientist examining a specimen. "Prettier, too, in a wholesome farm girl sort of way. I can see why James finds you appealing." "Mrs. Mitchell." "You will listen," she interrupted, her voice never rising above conversational volume, but carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. "You will listen, and then you will make the right decision for everyone involved." A waiter appeared with tea service, china so thin it was translucent, silver that gleamed like moonlight. Eleanor poured with practiced grace, every movement calculated for maximum effect. "I've had you investigated, of course, thoroughly. Your parents were heroes, I'll grant you that. Died saving others, very admirable. Your academic record is impressive despite your circumstances. Your work history shows reliability and dedication. Under different circumstances, I might even find you charming." She sipped her tea, letting the silence stretch like a blade between us. "But you're not suitable for my son, not because of your background. Poverty can be overcome. Not because of your education. Intelligence can be cultivated. You're unsuitable because you don't understand the weight of the Mitchell name, the responsibility that comes with our position in society." "I never asked for any of this," I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "No, but you accepted it. You allowed him to give you money, to solve your problems, to play the role of savior in your little Cinderella story." Her smile was razor thin. "Do you know what happened to the last woman who tried to change the trajectory of this family?" My blood turned to ice water. "Sarah. Sarah was brilliant, I'll give her that. Built sterling solutions from nothing while James played the charming front man. But she grew tired of living in his shadow, decided she wanted credit for her own achievements. She was going to leave him, take the company with her, expose him as the fraud he never meant to become." The words hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. "What are you saying?" Eleanor's expression never changed, but something flickered in her eyes, a moment of vulnerability quickly masked. "I'm saying that sometimes protecting the people we love requires difficult decisions. Sarah's accident was tragic, of course. Brake failure is such an unpredictable thing." The implication hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the edge of the table to keep from falling, my mind racing through the possibilities, the connections, the terrible logic of it all. "You're insane," I whispered. "I'm practical," she corrected. "James built his entire identity around Sarah's legacy because I taught him to value loyalty above all else. He's a good man, a kind man, but he's not strong enough to survive another betrayal, another loss." She reached into her purse and withdrew a check, sliding it across the table with the same casual grace she'd used to pour tea. The amount, $500,000, seemed to glow against the white paper. "This is your severance pay, Miss Sullivan. Take it, disappear, and let my son remember you as a beautiful dream rather than a nightmare that destroyed everything he's worked to build." I stared at the check, at the number that represented more money than my family had seen in 3 generations combined. Money that could buy me a new life, a new identity, freedom from the suffocating weight of poverty that had shaped every decision I'd ever made. And if I refuse? Eleanor's smile turned predatory. Then you'll discover just how creative I can be when it comes to protecting my family. Your nursing school dreams, your reputation, your future, all of it will disappear. People will remember you as the gold digger who seduced a grieving man and destroyed a $1 billion company. She stood with fluid grace, leaving the check on the table like a serpent coiled to strike. You have 48 hours to decide, Miss Sullivan. Choose wisely. After she left, I sat alone in that monument to old money and older cruelties, staring at a check that represented everything I'd ever wanted and everything I couldn't bring myself to take. The other patrons whispered and stared, recognizing me from the tabloid photos, their judgment sharp as broken glass. I tore the check in half, then quarters, then kept tearing until it was nothing but expensive confetti scattered across the pristine white tablecloth. The waiter who cleaned it up gave me a look of profound sadness, as if he'd witnessed similar scenes before, and knew they never ended well. Walking home through streets that suddenly felt hostile and unfamiliar, I realized that Eleanor Mitchell had made a fatal miscalculation. She thought I was motivated by money, by the promise of an easier life. She was wrong. I was motivated by love, for James, for the future we might build together, for the principle that good people shouldn't have to bow to evil ones. What I didn't know was that she'd anticipated my refusal, that my rejection of her offer had simply moved us to the next phase of her plan. The real war was just beginning, and I'd walked into it with nothing but courage and conviction to protect me. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes it isn't. The first sign that Eleanor's war had escalated came at dawn on Thursday morning, a thunderous pounding on my apartment door that sent me stumbling from bed in yesterday's clothes. Through the peephole I saw 2 police officers, their expressions grim beneath the harsh hallway fluorescence. Grace Sullivan? The taller one, a weathered man with kind eyes that didn't match his official tone, held up his badge. Detective Martinez, Charleston PD. We need to ask you some questions about missing medications from St. Mary's Hospital. My world tilted sideways. Missing medications? Several vials of morphine and oxycodone have gone missing from the pharmacy. Security footage shows you in the area during your last shift before your leave of absence. His partner, a younger woman with suspicious eyes, stepped forward. We'd like you to come downtown for questioning. I never went near the pharmacy, I said, my voice sounding hollow in my own ears. I cleaned patient rooms and common areas. I never had access. Ma'am, we need you to come with us. Now! The ride to the police station passed in a blur of sirens and city streets that looked foreign through bulletproof glass. In the interrogation room, a concrete box that smelled of desperation and industrial cleaner, they spread photographs across the metal table like tarot cards predicting my doom. This is you, isn't it? Detective Martinez pointed to a grainy security image showing someone in scrubs near the pharmacy door. The person's face was partially obscured, but the build was similar to mine. Tuesday, March 15th, 11:43 p.m. I studied the image, my heart hammering against my ribs. The body type is similar, but that's not me. I was cleaning the pediatric ward that night. There are sign-in logs, timestamps on keycard entries. Funny thing about those logs, the younger detective said, consulting her notes. They show several anomalies during your employment. Times when you were supposed to be in one area but your key card was used somewhere else. That's impossible. I never— Miss Sullivan, Martinez interrupted gently, we understand you've been under financial pressure, lost your jobs, facing eviction. Sometimes good people make desperate choices. The walls seemed to close in around me. Someone had systematically doctored records, planted evidence, created a digital paper trail that painted me as a drug thief who'd abused her position to feed an addiction I'd never had. The sophistication of it, the attention to detail, spoke of resources far beyond my understanding. I want a lawyer, I said. They released me pending further investigation, but the damage was done. By evening, the story had leaked to every news outlet in the city. Billionaire's girlfriend accused of drug theft screamed from newspaper stands and website headlines. Social media erupted with speculation. Amateur detectives dissecting every photograph of James and me for signs of my supposed addiction. James found me sitting in my car outside the police station, afraid to go home and face whatever new horrors might be waiting. His face was pale, his usually perfect hair disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it for hours. "Grace, thank God. I came as soon as I heard." He slid into the passenger seat, his presence both comforting and dangerous. "This is insane. You've never even taken aspirin without reading the instructions twice." "Your mother warned me," I said, staring through the windshield at the city lights that had once seemed magical but now looked cold and accusing. "She said she'd destroy my reputation if I didn't stay away from you." His jaw tightened. "She wouldn't. She's manipulative, yes, but she's not. She killed Sarah." The words hung between us like a confession at a murder trial. James went very still, his breathing shallow and controlled. "What did you say?" "She told me. Not directly, but clearly enough. Sarah was going to leave you, take the company. Your mother couldn't allow that to happen." I turned to face him, seeing my own horror reflected in his eyes. "The brake failure wasn't an accident, James. Your mother had her killed." He stared at me for a long moment, and I watched something die in his expression, the last vestige of childhood trust, the belief that the woman who'd raised him was capable of love without cruelty. "No," he whispered, but the word carried no conviction. "She's controlling, protective to a fault, but she's not a murderer." "Isn't she? Look at what she's doing to me. Forged security footage, falsified records, character assassination in the media. If she can do all this to someone she barely knows, what would she do to protect you from someone she saw as a real threat?" The silence stretched between us, heavy with implications neither of us wanted to voice. Finally, James pulled out his phone and dialed a number I didn't recognize. "Tommy, it's James. I need you to pull Sarah's accident report. Everything. Police files, insurance records, maintenance logs from her car. And Tommy, keep this between us." He hung up and looked at me with eyes that held too much knowledge. "If you're right, if she really—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "Then we're both in danger," I completed for him. "Because she's not going to stop until I'm completely destroyed or completely gone." The next morning brought fresh hell in the form of federal agents at my door. The Drug Enforcement Administration had taken an interest in my case, suggesting a larger network of pharmaceutical theft that somehow centered on me. My bank accounts were frozen pending investigation. My landlord, suddenly concerned about having a suspected drug dealer in his building, issued a formal eviction notice. I sat in Father O'Brien's office that afternoon, surrounded by the familiar smell of old books and candle wax, trying to make sense of a world that had turned upside down in less than a week. "She's destroying everything," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "My reputation, my future, my ability to defend myself, it's like fighting smoke. I can't grab hold of anything solid enough to prove my innocence." The elderly priest leaned back in his chair, his weathered hands folded across his chest. "Evil rarely announces itself, Grace. It comes dressed in righteousness, speaking of protection and love while wielding cruelty as a weapon. Then how do I fight it? With truth, with witnesses who know your character, with evidence that exposes the lies." He leaned forward, his eyes bright with fierce determination, and with faith that justice will prevail, even when the odds seem impossible. But as I left the church and walked home through streets where people now crossed to avoid me, where former co-workers looked away rather than meet my eyes, I wondered if faith was enough to survive Eleanor Mitchell's war. That night, alone in my apartment with the eviction notice on my table and my future crumbling around me. I made a decision that would change everything. I called James and asked him to meet me one last time. If Eleanor wanted a war, I would give her one. But first, I needed to know exactly what kind of monster I was fighting. The warehouse district at midnight was a graveyard of broken dreams and abandoned hope. Empty factories stood like tombstones against the sky, their shattered windows reflecting streetlights that barely held back the darkness. I sat in my car outside the address Tommy Chen had given me, staring at the building where Sarah Mitchell had taken her last breath. James arrived 20 minutes late, his face carved from stone, carrying a manila folder thick with documents that would either vindicate my suspicions or destroy what remained of his sanity. He slid into the passenger seat without a word, his silence more terrifying than any confession. "Tommy found everything," he said finally, his voice hollow as an empty grave. "Police reports, insurance investigations, the mechanics' statements. Sarah's brake lines were cut, Grace, professionally, precisely, made to look like normal wear and tear until the moment she needed them most." I closed my eyes, feeling sick with the weight of being right about something so horrible. The police never suspected. They suspected everything except the truth. Sarah was wealthy, successful, made enemies in business. They investigated corporate espionage, jealous competitors, disgruntled employees, never once looked at family. He opened the folder with trembling hands. "There's more. The mechanic who did the work was found dead 6 months later. Apparent suicide. Single gunshot to the head. But the trajectory was all wrong according to the ballistics expert who reviewed the case." James? And the life insurance investigator who was asking too many questions? Car accident? And the reporter who was looking into connections between Sarah's death and the company's board changes? Heart attack at 32 with no history of cardiac problems. His laugh was broken glass in the darkness. "My mother didn't just kill Sarah, she eliminated anyone who might expose the truth." The magnitude of Eleanor's crimes settled over us like a shroud. This wasn't just about protecting family reputation or maintaining social status. This was about a woman so consumed by the need to control every aspect of her son's life that she'd become a serial killer, methodically eliminating threats with the efficiency of a cancer destroying healthy tissue. "We have to go to the police," I said. "With what? Circumstantial evidence and conspiracy theories?" James's voice cracked with despair. "She's covered her tracks too well. Every death looks natural or accidental. Every witness is silenced or bought off. And now she's doing the same thing to you." As if summoned by our conversation, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Warehouse on 5th Street. Come alone or your boyfriend joins Sarah's collection." The message was followed by a photograph of James and me sitting in the car, taken moments earlier from an impossible angle. "She's here," I whispered, showing him the message. "She's been watching us." James grabbed my hand, his grip desperate. "We're leaving, now. We'll drive to the police station, demand protective custody." The first bullet spider-webbed my windshield. The second took out my rear tire. Our car lurched to the side, engine sputtering as James fought to maintain control. Through the broken glass, I saw movement in the shadows between buildings. Figures in dark clothing carrying weapons that glinted in the streetlight. "Out of the car," Eleanor's voice echoed from a speaker somewhere in the darkness. "Walk toward the warehouse. Slowly. Any attempt to run or call for help will result in immediate consequences." We climbed out with our hands visible, moving like sleepwalkers toward the building where Sarah had died. The massive steel doors stood open like the mouth of some mechanical beast, and inside, fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows that made everything look like a crime scene photograph. Eleanor waited in the center of the warehouse, dressed in a black coat that made her look like a mourner at her own funeral. She stood beside a chair where someone sat slumped forward, face obscured by shadows. My heart hammered against my ribs as I recognized the clothing. Tommy Chen's distinctive blue tie, his wire-rimmed glasses askew on his unconscious face. "Thomas has been very helpful," Eleanor said conversationally, as if we were meeting for afternoon tea instead of what was clearly meant to be our execution. "He provided so much useful information about your investigation. Unfortunately, helpful people tend to become liabilities eventually." "Mother, stop this." James stepped forward, his voice carrying an authority I'd never heard before. "Tommy's done nothing wrong. Grace has done nothing wrong. This ends now." "This ends when I say it ends," Eleanor replied sharply. "I've spent 30 years building your legacy, protecting your future, ensuring that the Mitchell name means something in this world. I won't let some little nobody destroy everything I've sacrificed for." She pulled a gun from her coat, a small, elegant thing that looked almost decorative until you saw how steadily she held it. "Sarah thought she could leave you, take everything we'd built together, expose you as the fraud she'd made you believe you were. She was going to destroy you for the sake of her precious integrity. So you killed her," I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "I saved him," Eleanor corrected. "Just as I'm saving him now from another woman who thinks she knows better than the family that raised him." Her smile was winter incarnate. "Sarah's death was meant to look accidental, but you forced my hand, Miss Sullivan. This will have to be more direct." She raised the gun, and I saw my death reflected in the barrel's dark eye. But James stepped between us, his body shielding mine from his mother's madness. "You'll have to kill me first," he said quietly. "And then you'll have nothing left to protect." For the first time since this nightmare began, Eleanor's composure cracked. Her hand shook, the gun wavering as tears filled her eyes. "James, please. You don't understand. Everything I've done, every choice I've made, it was all for you. I can't lose you like I lost your father." "You never told me how my parents really died," he said, understanding dawning in his voice. "Another car accident that wasn't an accident?" Eleanor's silence was confession enough. In that moment I saw the full scope of her madness, a woman who'd been orchestrating deaths for 3 decades, who'd built her son's entire life on a foundation of corpses, who genuinely believed that love justified any atrocity. "You're sick," James whispered. "You need help." "What I need," Eleanor said, steadying the gun with both hands, "is for this conversation to end." That's when the warehouse lights exploded in a cascade of sparks and shattered glass, plunging us into darkness so complete it felt like being buried alive. In the chaos that followed, shouts, gunshots, running footsteps, I lost track of everything except James's hand in mine, pulling me toward what I hoped was safety. The last thing I heard before unconsciousness claimed me was Eleanor's voice, screaming my name like a curse that would follow me into whatever hell awaited. I woke up in a hospital bed 3 days later, my head wrapped in bandages and my left arm suspended in a sling that made everything ache. Sunlight streamed through windows that overlooked a garden where real people walked free, untouched by the nightmare that had consumed my life. For a moment, I thought it might all have been some fever dream brought on by exhaustion and desperation. Then I saw Detective Martinez sitting in the corner chair, his weathered face carrying the weight of terrible knowledge, and reality crashed back over me like a cold wave. "How long have you been here?" I asked, my voice hoarse from whatever damage had been done in that warehouse. "Since they brought you in. Concussion, dislocated shoulder, and trauma-induced shock." He leaned forward, his expression gentler than I'd seen during our previous encounters. "Miss Sullivan, I owe you an apology, a profound one." We got played by someone with resources and connections we didn't anticipate. The memories came flooding back. Eleanor's gun, the darkness, James shielding me with his own body. Where is he? Where's James? Martinez's face darkened. Safe. In protective custody, while we sort through the biggest crime scene this city's seen in decades. He pulled out a digital recorder and set it on the bedside table. Grace, may I call you Grace? We need to know everything. From the beginning. Because what we found in that warehouse, what we discovered about Eleanor Mitchell's activities over the past 30 years, it's going to rewrite half the unsolved cases in our files. The story poured out of me like poison from an infected wound. The first night I'd driven James home, his mother's escalating intimidation, the planted evidence, the systematic destruction of my reputation. Martinez listened without interruption, occasionally making notes, his expression growing darker with each revelation. The warehouse belonged to a shell company Eleanor owned through 6 layers of corporate obfuscation, he said when I finished. We found detailed files on dozens of people, business rivals, journalists, investigators, anyone who posed a threat to her family's interests. Sarah Mitchell wasn't her first victim. Grace, she wasn't even her 10th. The magnitude of it staggered me. Eleanor Mitchell hadn't just been a controlling mother protecting her son. She'd been a serial killer operating for 3 decades, using her wealth and social position to eliminate threats with the efficiency of a corporate executive streamlining operations. The evidence room looks like something from a serial killer documentary, Martinez continued. Photographs, newspaper clippings, detailed surveillance reports. She kept trophies from every death she orchestrated, probably to relive the sense of control it gave her. Is she? I couldn't finish the question. Dead. Heart attack during the arrest, brought on by a combination of stress and the psychiatric medication she'd been taking for years. Turns out she'd been under treatment for severe personality disorders since James was a child, but she'd been manipulating even her own therapy sessions. I should have felt relief, or vindication, or some sense of justice finally served. Instead, I felt hollow, like a house after a fire has burned away everything that made it home. Eleanor's death meant James was free from her influence, but it also meant he'd have to live with the knowledge that the woman who raised him had been a monster wearing the mask of maternal love. Can I see him? I asked. Martinez nodded toward the door. He's been waiting outside since visiting hours started. Hasn't left the hospital except when we forced him to give his statement. James entered like a man walking through a graveyard, his usual confidence replaced by a fragility that made my heart ache. He'd aged years in the 3 days I'd been unconscious, new lines carved around his eyes by grief and revelation. Grace, thank God. He moved to my bedside with careful precision, as if sudden movements might shatter what remained of our world. I'm so sorry. For everything. For her. For what she put you through. For not seeing what she really was. I reached for his hand with my good arm, feeling the tremor in his fingers. You couldn't have known. No one expects their mother to be a serial killer, he finished with bitter accuracy. Tommy's alive, by the way, drugged but unharmed. He's the one who called the police when we didn't check in, probably saved all our lives. We sat in silence for a while, holding hands like survivors clinging to each other on a life raft, while the weight of Eleanor's crimes settled between us. The woman who'd raised him, who'd claimed to love him above all else, had built his entire life on a foundation of corpses. Every success he'd achieved, every moment of happiness he'd experienced had been purchased with someone else's blood. The company's in chaos, he said eventually. Board members are fleeing, stock prices have collapsed, and the media's having a field day with the billionaire serial killer mother headlines. Everything she claimed to be protecting is falling apart anyway. What will you do? He looked out the window at the garden where normal people lived, normal lives, his expression distant. Start over, I suppose. Strip away everything she built, everything she touched. Try to figure out who James Mitchell really is when he's not living someone else's dream. And us? The question slipped out before I could stop it, vulnerable and desperate. James turned back to me, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw hope flicker in his eyes. Us? Grace, you're the only real thing in my life, the only choice that was ever truly mine. If you'll have me, if you can forgive me for the hell my family put you through, I'd like to find out who we could become together. 6 months later, I graduated from nursing school with highest honors, my tuition paid by a scholarship fund James had established in Sarah's name. The ceremony took place in the same hospital where I'd once cleaned floors, where colleagues who'd once shunned me now offered congratulations and job opportunities. James sat in the front row, looking prouder than if he'd won a Nobel Prize. Beside him sat Father O'Brien, Tommy Chen, and Detective Martinez, the unlikely family that had formed from the ashes of Eleanor's destruction. We'd all been broken by her madness, but somehow we'd healed each other in the process. That evening, on the steps of the church where I'd found refuge during the darkest days, James proposed with a simple gold band that had belonged to his biological mother, the one piece of his past that Eleanor's poison hadn't touched. I can't promise you wealth or status or anything society considers valuable, he said, kneeling on worn stone steps where generations of couples had made similar vows. But I can promise you truth, always, and love that doesn't come with conditions or expectations or the need to be someone you're not. I said yes, not to the fortune he'd once possessed or the lifestyle he could provide, but to the broken, honest man who'd learned to choose love over fear, truth over comfort, redemption over reputation. Our wedding was small, 20 people in Father O'Brien's church, followed by dinner at the diner where James had first found me after that life-changing ride. We danced to music from an old radio, surrounded by friends who'd proven themselves worth more than all of Eleanor's carefully cultivated social connections. As I write this 5 years later, watching James read bedtime stories to our daughter Sarah Eleanor, named for the woman who taught us both about courage and the woman who taught us about forgiveness, I'm reminded that sometimes the deepest love grows from the darkest soil. We live simply now. James runs a nonprofit foundation that provides legal aid to people falsely accused of crimes they didn't commit. I work as a nurse at a community clinic, helping people who can't afford health care elsewhere. We drive old cars, shop at thrift stores, and find our greatest joy in ordinary moments shared honestly. Sometimes love doesn't rescue you from your circumstances. Sometimes it gives you the courage to embrace them, to find meaning in struggle, to discover that the richest life isn't measured in dollars, but in the depth of connection between two souls who choose each other every single day. Eleanor Mitchell was wrong about everything except one thing. Family is worth protecting. She simply never understood that real family isn't bound by blood or obligation, but by choice, compassion, and the daily decision to love someone exactly as they are. In the end, that love conquered everything. Dear friends, Grace and James's story reminds us that life's greatest treasures often come disguised as our darkest trials. At our stage of life, we understand that happiness isn't found in the absence of struggle, but in discovering who stands beside us when the storms hit hardest. Like Grace, many of us have faced moments when pride warred with practicality, when accepting help felt like losing ourselves. We've learned that true love isn't about rescuing someone from their circumstances. It's about choosing to walk through those circumstances together. Eleanor's tragic end shows us what happens when fear disguises itself as protection, when controlling others becomes more important than loving them. But Grace and James found something precious, A love built on truth rather than pretense, on choosing each other daily rather than clinging to what society expects. Their simple wedding, their ordinary joys, their decision to measure wealth in connection rather than currency, this speaks to those of us who've discovered that the richest life isn't the flashiest one. Sometimes the most profound happiness comes from finally being seen and accepted exactly as we are, flaws and all. Real family isn't just blood, it's the people who show up when life gets hard and love you anyway. What moment in your own life taught you the difference between genuine love and someone trying to control you? Have you ever discovered that your greatest struggle led to your deepest joy? Share your wisdom in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.